People think the hardest part of standing the Crown Gate is the boredom. They are wrong. The hardest part is that nothing is ever boring. You learn to see everything and move at none of it, and that is a different thing entirely from feeling nothing. Behind the black fur of the bearskin, behind the chin strap and the still face, there is a man counting the seconds the way a sailor counts the swell, and the seconds never come empty. I stood that gate for 9 years. I can tell you exactly what was happening behind my eyes on the morning the foreign brigadier decided I was furniture. My name is Owen Beckett. By the spring I am telling you about I had reached sergeant in the King's Own Stonewatch, the regiment that has held the gates of Bryneth Palace since before anyone alive could name the first man to do it. We are not the only guards in the kingdom of Veldoran, but we are the oldest, and the oldest of anything tends to attract two kinds of attention. The first kind comes from people who understand what age means and lower their voices around it. The second kind comes from people who have never had to earn anything that lasts, and who therefore assume that nothing lasting was ever earned. Brigadier Oral Karst was the second kind. He arrived on a Tuesday in a motorcade with flags on the bonnets, and he looked at me the way a man looks at a hat stand. I want to be fair to him, even now, because fairness is the only revenge worth keeping. He was not a stupid man. You do not reach brigadier in the army of the Marin Republic by being stupid. He was a soldier who had genuinely been to war, and there is a particular contempt that lives in such men when they look at ceremonial troops, a contempt that is half ignorance and half wound. They have seen what soldiering costs, and they cannot believe that the polished article in front of them has ever paid any of it. So they decide the polished article is a lie. It is a comfortable thought, and Karst was a comfortable man inside it. The Marin delegation had come for a defense summit. Veldoran and the Republic share a long, cold border and a longer, colder history, and every decade or so, the two crowns and the two governments remember that it is cheaper to talk than to bury, and they send men in good coats to a palace to do the talking. Bryneth was chosen that year. So the Crown Gate, which I had stood through rain and state funerals, and one genuine attempt at the gate by a man with a grudge and a kitchen knife, was suddenly the threshold across which an entire foreign army's pride would be carried, in the person of one brigadier and his staff. I felt the motorcade before I saw it, the way you feel weather. There is a particular quality to the silence of a crowd that has been told to expect something. The forecourt of Bryneth is cobbled in gray stone worn smooth as river rock by 3 centuries of boots and hooves, and lately, the soft soles of tourists. The Crown Gate itself is iron, gilded at the crest with the Veldoran lion, and it stands inside an arch of pale stone that holds the morning sun like a cup. I stood at my post on the left of the arch, my partner Lance Corporal Hadley on the right, and we did what we always do, which is nothing, with our whole bodies perfectly. The cars stopped, doors opened. The Marin ambassador came first, a small careful woman who knew the value of the place she was standing in and showed it by being quiet. Behind her came the military men, and behind the military men came Karst, and I knew him for the center of the party before anyone said his name, because the air rearranged itself around him. Some men carry rank like a coat they can take off. Karst carried it like a smell. He stopped in front of the gate. He was meant to walk through it. There was a whole choreography to the morning, an honor guard, a band somewhere out of sight tuning itself, but Karst stopped, and made the entire delegation stop with him, because he had seen me and Hadley and decided we were worth a remark. "Look at this," he said in Marin to the colonel beside him. He did not bother to lower his voice. He did not imagine, I think, that a parade ornament would speak Marin. They keep them like this, like something in a glass case. I speak Marin. I learned it in a place I will tell you about, from men who were not as careless with their words as the brigadier was with his. So I understood him perfectly when he stepped close to me, close enough that I could smell the coffee on him and the cold leather of his glove, and looked up into my face. He was not a tall man, and that, I came to understand, was part of it, and said, in Veldoran now, in my own language, slow and loud the way men speak to the deaf or the foreign. "Do you blink?" I did not answer. There is no answer. The post is a sentence I had taken, and the first word of it is silence. But I want you to understand what was happening behind my face, because that is the only part of this story that was ever truly mine. I was not insulted. I had been insulted before, by drunks and by tourists, and once by a government minister who wanted his photograph taken with his hand on my rifle and grew petulant when his aide explained, gently, that the rifle was not a prop. I was not insulted by Karst. I was something closer to tired, because I had met his kind before, in a place where being his kind got men killed, and I had hoped, taking this post, to have walked far enough away from that place to never meet it again. And here it was, in a good coat, breathing coffee into my face on a spring morning, in front of the gate I had chosen because it did not require me to be anything but still. "He doesn't blink," Karst announced to his staff, delighted, stepping back. "Wonderful, a wonderful little museum you have." And he walked through the gate, and the delegation followed, and the band found its note, and the morning resumed its choreography as if a stone had not been dropped into it. Hadley, that night off duty, asked me if I'd wanted to break Karst's nose. He was young, Hadley, and he asked it the way the young ask such things, half a joke and half a test, to see what the old sergeant was made of. I told him the truth, which is that wanting to break a man's nose is the easiest feeling in the world and worth exactly nothing, and that the regiment had not survived 300 years by employing men who confused the easiest feeling with the right one. He looked disappointed. They always do at first. Discipline looks like a cage from the outside. It takes years to feel it as a spine. What I did not tell Hadley, that night or any night, was the other thing. That Karst's contempt had not landed the way an insult lands. It had landed the way a smell lands. It had brought a place back. The cold border. A different cold border than the one between Veldoran and the Marin Republic, but cold in the same way. The cold of high stone country where the wind has nothing to do all day but find the gaps in your clothing and the gaps in your courage. I had been a younger man in that country, with a different kind of rifle than the ceremonial weapon I now held, and I had been very good at the thing the rifle was for, and the thing the rifle was for had hollowed out a part of me that I had been very carefully refilling, one still morning at a time, for 9 years. Karst, with his 3 words and his comfortable contempt, had reached into me and scraped the bottom of the part I thought I had filled, and found it not as full as I'd hoped. So, that is the man, and that is the wound he reopened, and now I will tell you what he did with it, because Karst was not a man to let a comfortable thought sit idle. He was a man who needed his comfortable thoughts confirmed in public. The summit ran 4 days. I was not in the rooms where the talking happened. My world was the gate and the forecourt and the long, cold geometry of the post. But a palace is a single body, and what happens in one of its rooms travels to all of them through the people who carry tea and fold linen and stand at doors. By the 2nd day I knew, the way you know weather, that Karst had become a problem. Not at the table he was, by all accounts, sharp and reasonable, a serious man doing serious work. The problem was the man he became in the margins, at the receptions and the dinners and the long ceremonial nothings that fill the gaps between real meetings. In the margins, Karst was a tourist in someone else's history, and he had decided that the history was a costume. He made remarks. He made them to our officers, who took them with the flat courtesy that is its own form of contempt, and he made them to his own staff, loudly, in rooms where Veldoran soldiers stood at doors and were assumed not to listen. He called the Stonewatch the dollhouse regiment. He told a story. I heard it 3 times before the week was out. Growing each time, about a parade he had seen in some capital where the ceremonial troops had practiced for months for a march that lasted 9 minutes, and he used it to make a point about priorities, about real soldiers and toy ones, about a kingdom that spent its defense budget on bearskins and brass. There was, buried under his rudeness, a real argument. There always is. A small country with an old army has to decide, every generation, how much of it's sold to keep in the showcase and how much to keep in the field, and reasonable people disagree about it. But Karst was not making a reasonable argument. He was enjoying himself. There is a difference, and a man at a door learns to hear it. On the third evening it stopped being remarks. There is a place inside Bryneth Palace called the Marksman's Court. It is not on the tourist map. It is an old courtyard, walled and roofed in part, that the Stonewatch has used for as long as the regiment has existed, first for the longbow and then for the musket and then for the rifle. And it is where, once a year on the Founder's Day, the regiment holds an exhibition of marksmanship that we call the King's 100. The name comes from an old wager a king, the story goes, bet a visiting prince that any 100 of his guardsmen, chosen at random, could outshoot the prince's chosen 100, and won, and the regiment has kept the form of it ever since, more ceremony now than contest, but the marksmanship is real. The targets are real. The discipline of the firing line is real. It is one of the few places left where the ornament and the soldier are the same man, and we are quietly proud of it in a way we do not advertise. Karst found out about the Marksman's Court the way comfortable men find out about everything. Someone mentioned it to fill a silence. And Karst, who had spent 3 days deciding that the Stonewatch could not soldier, heard about a place where the Stonewatch soldiered, and he could not leave it alone. He proposed at the third night's dinner in front of both delegations, with the easy confidence of a man who has never lost in front of an audience, that the summit be honored with a demonstration, a friendly exhibition, the Stonewatch and the Marin Honor Company side by side at the targets, a celebration, he called it smiling, of the soldier's oldest art. It was beautifully done. There was no way to refuse it that did not look like fear, and Karst knew that, and that was the whole of his craft. He had spent 3 days calling us a dollhouse, and now, in public with a smile, he was inviting the dolls to prove they could not shoot. Our colonel, a quiet man named Aldous Thane, who had soldiered in the same cold country I had, though we never spoke of it, accepted on behalf of the regiment with a courtesy so complete it could have been mistaken for gratitude. I was at the door of the dining hall that night, and I watched him accept, and I watched something move behind his quiet face that I recognized, because it was the thing I had been holding behind my own face since the morning at the gate. Colonel Thane knew what Karst did not. He knew who stood as gates. I learned the next morning that I was to shoot. I will tell you honestly that my first feeling was not pride. It was the cold, flat refusal I had felt the day I took the post. I had not picked up a rifle to aim it, really to aim it, not to present it on a parade ground in 9 years. The ceremonial weapon I carried at the gate was a weapon, fully capable, and I cleaned it and respected it and would have used it if the kingdom's need had ever come to my arch, but I had been spared that need, and the sparing was a mercy I had not stopped being grateful for. The Founder's Day 100 I had always found a way to step back from, year after year, citing the post, the roster, anything. Colonel Thane had never pressed me. He understood. He had been in the cold country. But this was not Founder's Day. This was a foreign brigadier who had decided my regiment was a lie, and Colonel Thane, who could have chosen any of 40 fine shots in the Stonewatch, had chosen me, and I understood, standing in his office with the spring light coming flat through the old glass, exactly why. He had not chosen me because I was the best. He had chosen me because of what I was, and because of what Karst had decided I was, and because the distance between those two things was a lesson he wanted taught in public, with no words, by the man best placed to teach it. I am not a vain man, but I will not pretend I did not understand the honor of being the answer to a question that should never have been asked. "You don't have to," Thane said. He said it looking out the window, not at me, which was his kindness. "I'll find another man. There's no shame in it, Beckett. I know where you've been." "I know where I've been too, sir," I said. "That's the trouble with it." He turned then and looked at me, and something passed between two men who had been to the cold country and come back carrying different weights. "He thinks you've never heard a shot fired in anger," Thane said. "He said it 3 times that I know of, to my face once. "I heard him at the gate, sir," I said, "the first morning." "Did you?" It was not a question. "And you stood there?" "That's the post, sir." Thane nodded slowly. "That's the post," he agreed. "Will you shoot, Sergeant?" And I thought about the cold country, and the part of me I had been refilling for 9 still mornings out of every 10. And I thought about Karst's coffee breath and his easy smile, and the word dollhouse traveling through the corridors on the lips of men carrying tea. And I thought, most of all, about the difference between the easiest feeling and the right one, which is the only thing my whole life had taught me worth keeping. And I understood that there was a way to do this that was the easiest feeling, a way to walk onto that court hungry to humiliate the man, and a way to do it that was the right one, and that the right one was harder, and that the regiment had not survived 300 years on the easy way. "I'll shoot, sir," I said, "but I'll shoot the regiment's way, not his." Thane almost smiled. "I'd have nothing to do with you if you'd answered any other way," he said. "Dismissed, Sergeant, and Beckett, clean the weapon you'll use. Don't borrow nerves you don't need." I want to stop here and tell you about the cold country, because you cannot understand what happened on the marksman's court without it, and because Karst, for all his confidence, never bothered to learn it, and that was the whole of his undoing. When I was a younger man before the Stonewatch, I served in the war in the Hadron Reach. You will not have heard of it. It was a small, ugly war in a high, cold place, the kind of war that does not make it into the histories that schoolchildren read, the kind that is large only to the men who were in it. I was a marksman. More than that, I was a scout marksman, which meant I went out alone, or nearly alone, into the high stone country ahead of everyone. And I lay still in the cold for hours, sometimes for days, watching, and when I was ordered to, I did the thing the rifle was for once from very far away, and then I lay still again. It is a trade that asks a particular kind of man, and I was that kind of man. And I will say it plainly because false modesty is its own vanity, very good at it. I held positions alone that men said could not be held alone. I once held a pass for 19 hours so that a column of my own people could withdraw across it. And I did it not by being brave, exactly, but by being still, by refusing every screaming instinct to move, to flinch, to do something, and instead doing nothing with my whole body perfectly for 19 hours, until the last of them was clear. For that, the crown of Veldorin gave me the iron scepter. I will tell you what the iron scepter is, because Karst never learned it, and a man who is about to be humbled by a thing ought at least to be told what the thing is. It is the highest decoration the Veldorin crown gives for valor in the field. It is given perhaps once in a decade, often after the man who earned it is dead. It is a small dark thing, no bigger than a coin, deliberately plain, because the men who designed it understood that the valor it marks is not a bright thing but a dark one, a thing done in cold places at great cost, and they did not want it to glitter. There were, the spring of the summit, 4 living holders of the iron scepter in the entire kingdom. I was one of them. I wore its ribbon, a thin band of dark iron gray, on my chest at the gate every day, where any man who knew what it was could read it in a glance. Karst had stood close enough to me to smell the coffee on his own breath, and he had not read it. He had looked at my face and decided it was empty. And he had never once dropped his eyes to my chest, because a parade ornament does not have a chest worth reading. That was the missed thing. That was the one detail the brigadier never checked. He had sized me up entire in the first 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds he had been so certain of what I was that he had walked straight past the proof of what I was, twice, on his way to the dinner where he called me a doll. I did not hate him for it. By the morning of the exhibition I had moved past hate to something more useful. I understood him. He was a man who had paid the price of war and had let the paying turn into a kind of pride, and the pride had curdled into the need to be the only one who had paid. To meet another man who had paid and paid more and asked for nothing and stood quietly at a gate, that would not be a relief to Karst. It would be an accusation. So he had to make me into something that had never paid at all. It was not cruelty exactly. It was a kind of self-defense, but it had made him careless, and careless men in the cold country do not last. The exhibition was set for the fourth and final afternoon, in the marksman's court, before both delegations and the king. I should tell you about the king, though I will tell you very little because he was a man who understood that his power lay in being still at the right moments, and I will honor that. He was an old man by then, our king, and he had been to the cold country himself in his youth in his own war, and he wore on his own chest, among many other things, a ribbon of thin iron gray. He and I had never spoken. But on the morning of the exhibition, as the delegations were finding their seats along the colonnade and the targets were being set at the far wall, the king walked the length of the firing line, as a host does, greeting the men, and he stopped in front of me. And he looked deliberately, not at my face but at my chest, at the ribbon there, and then up to my eyes, and he said nothing at all and moved on. It lasted 3 seconds. It was the opposite of everything Karst had done in his own 3 seconds. The king had read the thing the brigadier had missed, and had told me, in silence, that he had read it. I have served many things in my life. I am not ashamed to say that I would have served that old man through anything, for those 3 silent seconds alone. The Marin Honor Company was good. I will not pretend otherwise. It would cheapen the whole thing. They were real soldiers, drilled hard, and their lead shot was a young captain with a steady hand and an honest face who clearly wanted no part of his brigadier's theater, but had been given no more choice than I had. We nodded to each other on the line, the captain and I, the way men who understand the same thing nod across a thing neither of them wanted, and I think in that nod we became, briefly, allies against the man who had arranged us into enemies. Karst did not shoot. Of course he did not shoot. He had arranged the contest. He would not risk his person in it. He sat in the colonnade beside his ambassador, in the front row, with the comfortable smile of a man watching a thing he has already won, because to Karst the contest was not really about the shooting. The contest was about the spectacle of dolls being made to soldier. And dolls, he was certain, would fail in a way that confirmed everything he had been saying for 4 days, and he had arranged to be sitting in the front row when they did. I want to describe the firing line, because the line is where the whole truth of the afternoon lived, and almost no one watching understood it, and that was the point. The exhibition was shot in stages, each stage at a greater distance, the targets smaller and farther with each round, until at the last stage they were so far down the long court that they were, to the untrained eye, barely there at all. The early stages were close work, the kind of shooting any drilled soldier can do, and here the 2 companies were even, and the colonnade made its polite noises, and Karst's smile held, because nothing had yet happened to threaten his comfortable thought. He had expected the dolls to shake and fail at the easy targets, and they had not, but a man like Karst rearranges his expectations faster than he loses his certainty. They held up at the close work. He was no doubt telling himself, "Drill will do that. We will see what happens when it gets hard." It got hard. Stage by stage the line thinned, as it is meant to, the lesser shots stepping back with honor as their targets exceeded them, until at the last stage there were 2 men left on the whole line, the young Marin captain with the honest face and me. The last target in the King's 100 is set at the far wall of the marksman's court, which is, I have measured it, a distance that no honest soldier shooting standing and unsupported has any business hitting, which is exactly why the regiment keeps it. It is not a target a man hits with drill. It is a target a man hits with the other thing. The thing Karst was certain I did not have, the thing the cold country had burned into me at a cost I will carry to my grave. It is a target a man hits by being still, by refusing every instinct, by doing nothing with his whole body, perfectly, in the long breath between the heartbeat and the trigger, the way I had once been still for 19 hours so that a column of my own people could cross a pass. The Marin captain shot first, and he was good, genuinely good, and he came so close that the colonnade gasped. The kind of close that in a real engagement would have been a hit. The kind of close a man can be proud of for the rest of his life. He stepped back from the line with his head high, and he had every right to. And I saw Karst, in the front row, lean to his ambassador and say something. And I knew without hearing it that he had decided the captain had won, that the doll on the line would now flinch and miss, and that the 4 days of remarks would be sealed in front of the king. I want to tell you what I was thinking, on the line, in the long moment before I shot, because it is the only part of this that was ever mine, and because it was not what Karst thought it was. I was not thinking of Karst. I had set him down, the way I had been taught to set the rifle down. A man who shoots while thinking of the man he wants to humiliate will miss, because the wanting moves him, and the line does not forgive a man who is moved. I was thinking instead of the pass in the cold country, and the column crossing it, and the cost of the stillness that had let them cross, and the friend I had lost there, whose name I have not said in this telling and will not say now, because some things a man keeps off the page. I was thinking that I had taken the gate to be done with the rifle, and that I was not done with it after all, that it had followed me 300 miles and 9 years to a sunlit court in the heart of the only peace I had ever made, and that there was nothing to do about that except the thing I had always done, which was to be still, and let the stillness do the work, and ask for nothing. And then I did the thing the rifle was for, one last time, in a sunlit court, at a target no doll could reach, and the court went silent in the particular way a place goes silent when something has happened that the people in it do not yet have words for. I did not look at Karst. I want you to understand that because it is the heart of the whole thing. The easiest feeling in the world in that moment would have been to turn and find his face in the front row and let him see in mine that I knew exactly what I had just done to his 4 days of remarks. I did not turn. I lowered the rifle and I cleared it and I stood and I looked at nothing, the way I look at nothing at the gate, because the regiment had not survived 300 years on the easiest feeling, and because the lesson Colonel Thane had wanted taught was not taught by my face. It was taught by my stillness. It is always taught by the stillness. That is the whole of what we are. It was the king who turned it from a marksman's afternoon into the thing it became. The old man rose. A king rising is not a small thing. The whole colonnade rises with him by instinct, the way a tide answers a moon, and both delegations came to their feet and Karst with them, because even Karst could not sit while the king stood. And the king in the silence said, not loudly, he was past needing to be loud, that he wished to honor the marksman of the Stonewatch, and he asked, as a courtesy to his Marin guests, that the marksman's record be read, so that the Republic might know the quality of the men who guarded the gates of the kingdom they had come to talk peace with. And the regimental adjutant, a man with a clear, flat voice trained to carry across parade grounds, read my record into the silence of the marksman's court, in both languages, first in Veldoran and then in Marin, so that no man in either delegation could fail to understand. He read the Hadron Reach. He read the rank I had held and the trade I had practiced and the places I had held alone. He read the 19 hours and the pass and the column that had crossed it. And then he read, last slowest, the thin dark line of iron gray on my chest, and he said its name in both languages, the Iron Scepter, and he said how many living men held it, and he said that the marksman of the Stonewatch, the sergeant who had stood the Crown Gate for 9 years and not blinked, was one of the 4. I was looking at nothing, but a court is a single body, and you feel the weather of it even when you do not turn, and I felt, without seeing it, the front row of the colonnade go cold around the brigadier. I felt the young Marin captain beside me go very still in a different way than I was still, the stillness of a man who has just understood the size of the thing he was nearly used against. And I felt, most of all, the absence where Karst's smile had been, the way you feel a fire that has gone out behind you, by the change in the warmth of your back. He had read the record now. He had no choice. It had been read aloud into both his languages by a man with a parade-ground voice in front of his own king and ours. The detail he had missed at the gate, the detail he had walked past twice on his way to call me a doll, had been put into his hands in front of the two nations whose peace he had come to negotiate, and there was nowhere in the sunlit court for him to put it down. I will tell you what Karst did then, because the measure of a man is not only how he gives a wound but how he takes one, and I have tried to be fair to him from the first word of this telling, and I will be fair to him now. He did not bluster. I had half expected him to. Comfortable men, exposed, often reach for more comfort louder. He did not. There was a long moment in which the whole court waited to see whether the brigadier would make himself smaller by trying to be larger, and he did not take it. He had been a real soldier once before the pride curdled, and the soldier in him recognized, when it was read aloud, the size of the thing he had spent 4 days mocking. I saw it in him, finally, not at the gate, where he had seen nothing, but here, where he was made to see. His own commander, the senior Marin officer, a gray man who had said almost nothing all week, leaned toward Karst and said something short and quiet that I did not hear and did not need to, because the brigadier's face received it the way stone receives a chisel. And then Karst did the one thing that let me stop, finally, being tired of him. He crossed the court. In front of both delegations, in front of the king, in front of the men he had called dolls, the brigadier walked the length of the marksman's court to the firing line, and he stopped in front of me, close, the way he had stood at the gate, close enough that I could have smelled the coffee if he'd had any, and I waited, still looking at nothing, for whatever a humbled, comfortable man does at the end of his comfort. He came to attention. Oral Karst, brigadier of the Marin Republic in front of his own king and ours, came to attention before a Veldoran sergeant, and he held a salute, and he held it longer than courtesy required, long enough that it stopped being courtesy and became something else, became the only apology a soldier of his kind knows how to make, which is not made with words. And here is the thing, the last thing, the thing that is the whole reason I have told you this at all. I did not have to return it. I was at the post, in a manner of speaking. I was the marksman of the stonewatch on the regiment's own ground, and there were men in the colonnade, I am sure, who wanted me to leave the brigadier's salute hanging in the air, unanswered, as the final humiliation, the doll declining to acknowledge the soldier. The easiest feeling in the world. After 4 days, after the coffee breath and the dollhouse and the do you blink, after the cold country and the pass and the friend whose name I keep off the page, the easiest feeling in the world was to let him hold that salute until his arm shook. I returned it. Of course I returned it. The regiment had not survived 300 years on the easiest feeling, and neither had I, and neither, it turned out, had the part of me I had been refilling for 9 still mornings out of every 10. Because in the moment I returned Karst's salute, clean and full, and without a flicker of the triumph the colonnade wanted to see, I understood that the part of me the cold country had hollowed out was not as empty as I had feared on the morning at the gate. It had been filling all along. 9 years of stillness had been filling it, and the proof of it was not the shot. Any cold and hollow man can make the shot. I had made colder, harder shots than that in places with no colonnade to applaud them. The proof of it was the salute. The shot was the trade. The salute was the man. That is the difference Karst had never learned, and the difference my whole life had been spent learning, and the difference the king had read in 3 silent seconds at the firing line that morning. A doll can be made to shoot. A doll cannot return the salute of the man who called it a doll cleanly, with nothing held back. That takes the other thing. That takes the spine that discipline becomes, after enough years if you let it. The summit ended the next morning. They signed what they had come to sign. The border stayed cold but stayed quiet, which is the most you can ask of a cold border. The motorcade left with the flags on the bonnets, and as it passed the Crown Gate, I was on the post. I am always on the post. That is the whole of what I am. The car carrying the Marin delegation slowed, and the window came down, and Brigadier Oral Karst looked out at me across the worn gray cobbles, And this time he did not look at my face. He looked at my chest, at the thin dark line of iron gray he had walked past twice. He looked at it for the length of a breath, the way a man reads a thing he should have read the first time, and then he raised 2 fingers to his brow in something smaller than a salute and larger than a wave. And the window went up, and the car carried him out of my life and back to his cold border and his own gates, and whatever a comfortable man becomes after he has been made, once in a sunlit court, to read the thing he missed. I did not return the gesture. I was on the post, and the post is a sentence whose first word is silence, and I had nothing left to teach the brigadier that the record had not already taught him. I stood at the crown gate of Bryneth Palace, in the spring light, under the gilded lion, and I did not blink, and the motorcade dwindled down the King's Road and was gone. People think the hardest part of standing the gate is the boredom. I told you at the start that they are wrong, and now you know why. The hardest part is that everything that has ever happened to a man is standing the gate with him, all of it. The cold country and the pass and the friend and the medal no one reads. And the whole discipline of the thing is to carry all of it and move at none of it, to let it stand the post with you and never let it move your face. Karst thought my stillness was emptiness. It was the opposite. It was everything I had ever been, held perfectly still, so that none of it would spill. I stood that gate 4 more years before they retired me. In all that time no one ever again asked me if I blinked. But every Founder's Day after that spring, when the regiment held the King's 100 in the marksman's court, I shot. I had found, you see, that I was not done with the rifle, and that pretending I was had not made me free of it. It had only made me afraid of it. The shot was never the thing I had feared. The thing I had feared was that I had become only the shot, only the cold hollow trade of the cold country and nothing else. The brigadier, without ever meaning to, had cured me of that fear. He had called me a doll, and in answering him I had learned in front of 2 nations that I was a man, a still one, a quiet one, a man who carried a great deal and showed none of it, but a man. And the medal no one reads. I wore it every day to the end, the thin dark line of iron gray on my chest at the gate, where any man who knew what it was could read it in a glance. Most never did. Most looked at my face and decided it was empty and walked on through to whatever they had come for. I never minded. The reading was never the point. The medal was not for them. It was for the column that crossed the pass, and for the friend whose name I keep off the page, and for the 19 hours. And for the long cold proof that a man can do the hardest thing there is, stand still, and hold, and ask for nothing, and walk out of it still a man. That is the whole story. A brigadier sized me up in 3 seconds and missed the one thing that mattered, and a king read it in 3 seconds and missed nothing. And the difference between those 2 men is the difference between everyone who has ever looked at a guard and seen a statue, and the few who have looked at a guard and understood that a statue is just a man who has learned to carry everything without moving. I learned to carry it at a gate. I would not trade the 9 years of it for any easier life. The easiest feeling in the world is worth exactly nothing. I knew that before Karst, and I knew it after, and standing the crown gate of Bryneth Palace, under the lion in the spring light not blinking, I knew it best of all.